You know, some folks still look a bit surprised when they see a woman ride up on a bike. Well, they shouldn't, because ladies have been riding motorcycles since the very beginning. And why not? Because any woman who can ride a horse can ride a hog. You may have wondered how the Harleys got their nickname, Hog. Well, it seems that around 1920, there was this old country boy on the Harley race team. And every time he'd win a race, he'd run a victory lap with his pet pig sitting on the tank. Pretty soon, the rest of the Harley racers began doing the same thing, and people started calling them the Hog Boys. From then on, Harleys became hogs. Or at least that's how the story goes. Nobody really knows for sure. What we do know is that back in 1922, Harley came out with its first 74 cubic inch engine. It was big, it was powerful, and America was ready for it. The country wasn't quite rocking and rolling yet, but it was roaring. And ladies were a big part of that noise.
The suffrage movement had finally succeeded in getting women the right to vote, and the American female was taking a new, more assertive role in society. The whole country was in a post-war euphoria. It was a time of flappers and sheiks, wild parties and hot jazz. The nation was prosperous and spirits were high, despite the fact that Prohibition was in effect and nobody was supposed to be drinking. Professional sports reached new heights in popularity. Athletes were becoming culture heroes, names like Babe Ruth and Jack Dempsey. Nothing was too daring, nothing too outrageous, but the motorcycle world was suffering.
Then they put the parts on moving conveyor belts. This was a great step forward because now they could regulate the flow of work and keep it moving at a constant rate of speed.
Henry Ford's new assembly line techniques were turning out Model Ts by the thousands. Cars were suddenly as cheap as motorcycles, and two-wheel transportation was no longer competitive. Dozens of manufacturers went out of business overnight. Harley-Davidson fought through the problem with strong sales to the U.S. Postal Service. They were even featured on these 1925 special delivery stamps. But Harley's real savior was the police. Harleys had been used by police departments since 1909, when the city of Pittsburgh rolled out its first motorcycle cop on a hog. But the real boom came in the 20s. By the middle of the decade, over 2,500 state and city PDs were mounting patrolmen on Harleys. Police claimed they were forced to buy these bikes because the 74s were so popular with bootleggers. Coupled with a sidecar rig, these powerful V-twins could carry a large supply of illegal hooch and still outrun police cars. This began the cops and robbers split that has continued up to the present day. The law rides Harleys, and the outlaw rides Harleys.
You think they'll let us have the motorcycle?
Why, of course. We're it tonight.
The 20s also introduced a new element to the world of motorcycling. Thousands of young men like Lawrence of Arabia had been exposed to bikes during the war. They discovered that war was hell, but that motorcycles were fun.
Just a minute. Why the blazes don't you look where you're going, sir?
I'm sorry, sir.
Isn't it customary to salute one's superior officer? Thank you.
In case you're wondering, this 1930 film by Howard Hughes inspired the nickname of a bomber squadron stationed in England during World War II. Several of those flyers came back to California and started a motorcycle club. I reckon you can guess what name they chose. The idea of a bike club wasn't new in the 1920s, but now they were really catching on. With them came a whole new concept in transportation, the recreation vehicle. For the first time, people bought a motor vehicle not for practicality, not for transportation, but for fun. With this new approach to riding, a motorcycle culture truly began to emerge. The well-dressed rider could choose from an array of jackets, hats, and accessories designed specifically for motorcycling. This sport looks like he ordered right from the catalog. But even the new styles of the emerging motorcycle culture weren't enough to help the industry back in the 20s. These were hard times for American bike manufacturers. Sales were evaporating, and then the bubble really burst.
I like riding. I like riding Evos, shovels, pans, just about any Harley that was ever made. But this old flathead here, well, it's just not my favorite kind of hog. Now, that's not to say it wasn't dependable. That engine stayed in production for almost 45 years, longer than any other motorcycle engine. Just seems like every time I saw one of these, there was an old meter maid sitting on it, giving some poor son of a gun a parking ticket. But nowadays, things have changed. You see these bikes turning up at custom shows and rallies, usually all tricked out, too. Chromed up, fancied up, some of the most outrageous bikes around. But when the Flathead first came out, folks weren't too concerned with chrome. It was 1929, and what people were worried about was survival.
The Great Depression, ushered in by the stock market crash, crippled the world's economy. Fully 1/3 of America's workforce was unemployed, with no welfare, no food stamps, no unemployment benefits, nothing but poverty. By 1931, only 2 U.S. motorcycle companies were still in existence, Harley and Indian, and both were struggling. The motorcycle scene in America virtually ground to a halt. Nobody had the money to buy gas, much less a new bike, and Harley sales fell to an all-time low. The motor company had to look overseas to survive, and it was foreign sales which kept them alive. Harleys were soon turning up in the most distant places, from Tierra del Fuego to the jungles of Rangoon. This is when the international cult of Harley-Davidson really began. Yes, even in France.
Je n'ai besoin de personne en Harley-Davidson. Je ne reconnais plus personne en Harley-Davidson. J'appuie sur le starter et voici que je quitte la terre. J'irai peut-être au paradis, mais dans un train d'enfer.
Today, Harleys inspire an absolute passion around the world. And nowhere is this passion greater than in Japan, a country which itself produces some of the world's finest motorcycles. This was actually one of Harley's first overseas markets, dating all the way back to the Flathead era. A major earthquake had destroyed Japan's road system, and motorcycles were needed to navigate the damage. In 1929, Harley shipped over an entire factory of machining tools. The Japanese produced their own 74s under the name Rico. It was the first motorcycle factory in Japan, and Harley-Davidson began it. Harleys were popular throughout Asia back then, but by the mid-30s, most of these bikes were being adapted for combat. The world was once again on the verge of war.
I got an appointment to insult Ambassador Frontino. I don't want to keep him waiting. Step on him. This is the 5th trip I made today, and I haven't been anywhere yet.
Thank you, Billy. You know, when the producers asked me to introduce this segment, they said I'd be doing the knucklehead era. You think they're trying to tell me something? You know, when people talk about panheads and flatheads, what they're really referring to is the shape of the engine, like right here. The valve covers on the cylinder heads look sort of like knuckles. Hence, knucklehead. Harley speak, you got me? They were considered the father of all modern Harleys, the first overhead valve engine. Now, don't ask me about valves. I don't know anything about that. Knucklehead will do for me. Came out in 1936. That's a pretty good year for the United States of America. We were just beginning to come out of the Depression.
America was at last feeling a sense of relief. The economy wasn't completely healed, but new programs were getting the nation back on track. People could finally indulge in the joys of motorcycling. Picnics, games, and rallies were happening all over the country, and there was a renewed spirit of fun in the land. Hollywood celebrities like Clark Gable, Ward Bond, Van Johnson, and Robert Young were seen tooling around studio lots on their Harleys. Oscar-winning actor Victor McLaughlin started a motorcycle drill out performing today.
Hey, they passed us. What do we do now? We gotta keep this water ahead of them. Come on, Thunderbolt.
Even the Three Stooges were capering around on their hogs.
I got an idea. Take this. Get in there.
Zerschlagen gleichzeitig die rückwärtigen Verbindungen des Feindes.
But overseas, the situation was desperate. Europe exploded into a blitzkrieg. America tried to remain neutral, but by 1942, the country was in its Second World War. Harley enlisted along with millions of other civilians. Production bikes were quickly modified for military use, and a hardy breed of GI mounted up, motorcycle scouts. Motorcycles saw service in all the theaters of the war: reconnaissance, communications, and of course, police work. But it wasn't only the guys who were serving. The American female in 1943 was a pretty hardy breed herself.
In mountain country, a woman's motorcycle corps takes to the field. Trained as dispatch riders, they carry messages and first aid equipment to lonely outposts. Women of America serving on the home front.
Harley-Davidson emerged from the war more powerful than ever before. Its last domestic competitor, Indian, was about to collapse, and America was soaring. At no time in the history of the world did people enjoy more rights than those now found in America. But with these returning GIs came questions about how far individual freedom should go.